Oh, no countdown. We're on, Cameron.
Yeah, we are.
We have a special guest today, don't we, Cameron?
We do. I I am pleased to introduce my wife, who, if anybody's been watching our content, they've come across Sarah in the past. But we wanted Sarah to join us this morning because, well, actually, Kyle, why did we want Sarah to join us?
So I've put together a program called The Secrets of Parenting Strong-Willed Kids. And I recorded hours of training videos. And after talking with Cameron and realizing I'm missing a lot of things. And so what I really want to do, if it's okay with you, I kind of trashed all of it, which,
Oh,
because I
wow.
want this program to be, when people watch it, I want them to say, every parent, now I know what to do, and every parent needs this. That's what I really want, right? Every parent who's raising a challenging or strong-willed or spirited kid, whatever we want to call them, right? I think people call them different things. I want them to go, now I know what to do, number one. And number two, holy crap, everybody needs this, right? So that's really the goal. So what I'm hoping I can do with you guys today is kind of give you an outline of what I want to cover in each of the videos I do, and then go back. I'm going to give you an outline of all of them first. Then I want to go back and talk with you about each of them and kind of have you help me fill in blanks on questions you might have in those areas. And that way I can put something together that's like so powerful that people are leaving it going, you know what, I've got a plan now. I'm ready. I'm rolling. And even if I mess up, I know what to do. Right? Is that reasonable? Is that okay?
Yeah.
That sounds good.
Perfect. So initially I'm going to talk a lot, but then I want a lot of feedback from Cameron, from you, but especially you, Sarah. I'd love that. And then, okay.
Okay.
So my program consists of 6 separate videos because I think people need to take this in chunks, and I think maybe one a day for 6 days or however they want to spread it out. But the first video is I called Ground Rules. And the ground rules are that everything I'm going to teach them is based on love, loving your kids, right? Disciplining through love, managing them through love. It's all done in a spirit of love. That's it. I'm going to talk about the commonalities that all of these strong-willed or spirited or challenging kids have. I know each kid is individual, and we'll talk about that later on. But there are commonalities that they all have. And I kind of want to cover that up front so everybody can kind of see that their kids, from the outside in, they're like, oh, yeah, I got it, right? And they know that they're in the right place. And then, and who they are, who these kids are. Oh, I'm sorry. I got a pop up. I'm going to get rid of that. And then what they need from us. So the ground rules will be everything's based on love, the commonalities that all these kids have, and who they are, and then what they need from us as parents. So that's the ground rules I'll cover first in the first video. The second video is I'm going to talk about our family and some of the results we've had, and maybe share results that I've seen from you guys as I've watched your videos, because I know you guys are doing the same kind of stuff I'm doing. But I'm also going to share a lot of the mistakes we made and really some of the things that held us back from moving forward very quickly, because what I'm trying to do really is take 15 years of combined experience and squeeze it into one presentation so people can get the best stuff and run with it, right? Instead of having to go through the pain and suffering that some of us have gone through for years and years to figure this stuff out. So we'll talk about the mistakes we made and how it's not really our fault, because if you don't know, you just don't know. And all of us parents are doing the best we can, obviously, with what we know. And then belief system. And I'm going to talk about a little bit how I really didn't even believe it was possible when I first started. And that may be where some people are at. And I want to let them know that's okay, because I didn't really think it was possible either, but I was so committed that I didn't care what my beliefs were. I was just going to take action. And if nothing else, fail so much that I found an answer, right? So that's the first video. The second video is not one size fits all. And this is where I talk about each of our kids are unique and different. We're going to have to create customized plans for each of them, right? We all know that even though there's a lot of commonalities in these kids that are strong-willed or spirited or challenging, they're all unique. And we're going to talk about that framework that we've created that you guys know about that allows you to create strategies for specific um, challenges that you face as a parent and your kids are facing. And those are everything from one end of the spectrum, maybe anxiety, to, you know, challenging behaviors, to all the way to the other end of the spectrum, right? Running away, and even, threats of suicide or ideation, suicide ideation. So, um, and then we'll talk about the framework and so that's the second video. The third video is in making one good decision at a time. Not, I think too many of us look too far ahead and we want to get to that end result instead of taking one solid good action. And I'll talk about internalizing some of the strategies and talk about a framework for that. And we'll talk about winning every challenge. I think you've used this in action, right? So, and kind of that
Mhm.
framework so that people have that they can start working with. The fourth video is the don't freak out video. Too often we just lose our cool and we snap into our old patterns. And we'll talk about the wait framework and how that can help you when you feel yourself snapping into those old patterns, escape that and become your very best when they are at their very worst. And that's when they really need us the most, right? And then on the fifth video, we're going to talk about a plan moving forward. So that's kind of the general flyover. And I'll go back to the first one, ground rules. Again, based on love, the commonalities that these kids have and who they are and what they need from us. So I'm kind of want to hear what you guys think about that first video and what questions you might have. And I'm going to be writing. I'm taking notes on what you guys say. So if it looks like I'm not paying attention, I promise I am. So tell me what you're thinking about the ground rules video as it's currently organized, or if it's just really bad altogether and forget about it. I want to hear your thoughts.
You want to start, Cameron?
Well, anytime someone talks to me about rules, I want to know the principles behind them.
Okay.
Because if a rule is just a rule, I'm probably not going to follow it.
Okay.
Are the ground rules just for parents then, or is it something that is to be communicated with the child, as
The
well?
ground rules,
Is it
yeah, the
a
ground rules in this case are for the parent, and really the ground rules of the master class moving forward. Some things that they need to know and understand prior to taking the next steps in the master class. So not necessarily ground rules for our kids. That's covered a little bit later on in one of the other videos. Yeah.
okay?
Oh, sorry about that. I should have clarified that for you.
So, can you give me an example of what you think would be one of the ground rules?
Well, the ground rules being number one is everything that I'm going to teach in this master class is based on love, right? So if you're not approaching difficult situations in a spirit of love, it's gonna go sideways. Does that help? Does that help you a little bit? Okay. The second one being we need to know who these
Yeah.
kids. One of the ground rules I think is we kind of need to know how these kids tick. I think sometimes we forget that they're kids. They're 10 years old and we're expecting them to act like adults. And I want to set the ground rules for here's some unique things about there's some commonalities among kids that are challenging. And I want to kind of give the parents an insight into the kids' minds so that they understand how this is going to help them work within their kid, the parameters their kids have. So again, I'm kind of setting the stage for if you're expecting your kid to go from challenging to whatever you say, mom, you're expecting the wrong thing. That's not the way these kids work, right? And so I want to set the ground rules that it's going to be hard because raising kids is hard. But there's two kinds of hard. There's the hard that leaves you frustrated and angry and discouraged and feeling like a bad parent. and guilting yourself. And there's the hard, that in doing the right things makes you feel like you've done a great job, even though it's still hard. You've done a great job, and your kids are getting what you need, and they're getting the discipline, and they're getting the the support, and all those things, right? So, but you can't really know that unless you kind of understand kind of some of the ways these kids think and how they're what motivates them. So I want to set those ground rules up front, right? And then the third is what they need from us, which is, I don't want to get into too much details, but they need certain things from us. If we just default parent these kids, we've seen how that can turn out, and what the problems can be. Cameron shared with me a story about I think you said your brother makes his kids do hard things, and you were like, why would you force them to do hard things when,
Yep.
why would we do that? And then realizing down the road that it gave them strength when hard things were forced upon them. And so, yeah, so those are what I mean by ground rules, is just kind of setting the stage for what you should expect as a parent, and what should expect from your kid before you even move into the master class. Does that answer your question okay, Sarah?
Yeah, and I think coming from my background, the word ground rules just kind of means maybe something different to
Okay,
me. Uh,
tell me what words would describe in your mind what we're talking about here, because I'd like to know that. Ground rules might be the wrong word.
um, maybe expectations. What are your expectations for this class? What are your expectations of your child? I'm not exactly sure if that is the right word, but it's for me, it's the right description of what you're setting
I,
up. Is okay. Here are my expectations for this class. This is what you can expect. Here are the expectations you should have for your children going into this class. Because ground rules to me are like it brings me back to the playground. Here's the ground rules. You don't touch anybody. You can only tag with a flag. You can, that kind of stuff is so concrete, whereas expectations aren't
you
concrete,
know what? This is why I wanted you
because
on.
you can't
Golly,
expect the
Sarah,
same thing
this
from.
so good. This is why I wanted you on here, Sarah. This is perfect. This is fantastic. Yay! See me celebrating over here already within 5 minutes.
You're
You're
happy.
running me down a path. Yeah, this is perfect, because this is really what I need. I need that feedback. And now that you've said that, I completely understand exactly what you're talking about. And I appreciate that.
Mm.
Perfect. Yay. I love it. Thank you so much. Man, who's the genius for asking Sarah to be on this call, Cameron? Who is the genius?
That was you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Oh my
I love it.
goodness.
Because you've clarified something for me, and probably all those people who are involved or wanting to be involved, right? You're right. Ground rules is a hard line, and that's so
Mm.
much better. Anything else about that, or before we move to the next section?
Do you know how?
Well, I
Do you
like.
have them? Go
Go
ahead,
ahead,
Sarah.
Cameron. All right. Well, I like what you said about expectations for having certain ages of children. What I struggle with is not. I I don't feel like I have over expectations for my child at a given age. I feel like I have over expectations for a child with certain unique components to their personality and the way that they think. And so I think if I look at my 14-year-old, I'm like, my expectations of her are not too high as a 14-year-old. But as a 14-year-old with her specific challenges, they are. And so when you say expectations of your children at certain ages, I think a better description would be meeting your child where they're at. and being able to recognize where they're at despite their age, but in their progression and in their growth and where they are currently.
Perfect. That's better. Yeah. Because who they are and how they think is not as good as meeting them where they're at in that moment. Right? Yeah. I like that. That's great too.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll make sure I cover that in there too. That's good. That's good information because I think, Cameron and I have talked about this. Sometimes we get the curse of knowledge. We know something in the principles behind it so well that we don't describe it very well to others, and we expect them to understand what we're saying. I think we're all kind of guilty of that in some cases. So you're helping me break this
You
down
bet.
so that more people can understand uh, what we're talking about. Yeah, and here's what I would. You're gonna like this one. I'm excited for you to see it too, Sarah, because a big part of what I teach is that these kids are smart, they're capable, and they're learning. Everything that happens there is teaching them something, and they're picking it up, and they're learning how we work, how to work us, how the world works, and that's their job, right? And we can easily teach wrong lessons if we manage things in different ways, right? Lessons that may not be the most powerful lessons they can learn moving forward, even at a very young age. And so yeah.
Yeah.
So okay, but they start doing that pretty young. We've seen it, right? We see 2-year-olds that are whiners, right? And they whine because they get what they want.
Yep.
They have figured out it too. If I whine long enough and hard enough, mom gives in or dad gives in, right? Or if I go to mom and she says no, and I go to dad, he says okay. I've learned that's a process I can follow, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's really kind of the expectations that I want them to understand is that that's what our kids are doing at a very young age. Is they're learning creatures and they're learning based on outcomes, and we give them these varied outcomes all the time. That's confusing, right? But meeting them where they're at and helping them and presenting things so they get the right outcomes, right, that lead them down this path is always going to be a powerful thing for us as parents. And again, I think sometimes we just don't. A lot of parents. I mean, I didn't know. I didn't know that if my kid whined so much that I ended up giving in, I was teaching him to be a bigger whiner. I didn't know that way back when, right? And that's a habit that's hard to break once they start getting into it, right? And that so okay, perfect. Let's
Right.
move. It's okay with you to section 1, where I'm just going to share a little bit about our family and our results and some of my kids and some of the challenges they faced. And then I'm going to talk about the mistakes we made as a family and make sure everyone knows that it's they and I'm going to do that because I think there's a lot of parents that are doing things that don't realize they might be mistakes, or uh, they're in certain patterns, right? As parents, we fall into these patterns of doing the same things when our kids do certain things, and how that can lead us and our kids to be more challenging or to have more difficult circumstances. So I'm going to cover that in number 2, and the belief. Again, I think some parents believe, well, my kid is just challenging. There's nothing I can do. I wish my child was easier, right? Or hope and pray that they get over it or figure it out.
Or
Or
or I think one of the biggest ones is the belief that, well, this is how my parents did it and I turned out okay, so this is how I'm going to do it.
okay, I love that. That's a good way of doing it. Do you have brothers and sisters? Uh,
I do.
did they all turn out like
I
you,
have
Sarah?
7.
Just curious. Did they all turn out like you?
No,
Yeah,
they did
that's
not.
interesting, isn't it? Isn't that interesting? How, yeah,
Yep.
your parents did something and all the kids turned out completely different, right? Which is, again, it's, that's going to go into what I talk about, which is, I think I've seen this over and over with a lot of moms specifically, is they pour their heart and soul into their kids. And that, for 18 years of their lives, their life is designed around their kids and supporting them and loving them and nurturing them. and then the kids go sideways somehow. And the mom says, 18 years of my life is wasted. And it's just devastating, right? And I've seen that in parents. And so I like what you said there. I'm going to do what my parents did. I don't know how challenging you were, Sarah, or maybe you weren't, and maybe you had brothers and sisters who were. I don't really know. I don't know the struggles that your family had, but um, that kind of leads to the third video, which is each child has to be parented uniquely, right? There's no one set way to parent. And in video 3, we talk about creating custom plans for each child, right? And through our framework that we facing challenges and how to manage those challenges specifically for that child that are going to give you the outcomes that you're looking for long term. So that's video 3. So, but before I do that, any other thoughts on video 2? The mistakes we made, the beliefs, the taking action. Any other thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's really good that you're doing that, because I think part of the struggle of being a parent in general is feeling like you're the only one that has problems. And, I even though you express that you've had difficult challenges and difficult times, it's hard to look at you on the outside and believe that. Do you know what I'm
Sure.
saying?
Yeah, because of
You're happy. You're happy, and your kids are happy, and you guys have a good time together, and it's hard to it's like, well, maybe, but how hard could it be when he's happy and his kids are happy
that's so
all
that
the
is
time,
so that is
right?
so profound. That is so profound, right? Because so what you're suggesting is I do need to share some stories of pain and suffering and why.
You need to share how messed up you were so that other people can go, oh, good. Look, he got there. I can get
Well,
there
he
too.
can do it.
Well, and not only the difficult experience, but how you felt about it, because you know were you defeated? Did you feel defeated? Did you feel like there was no answer? I mean, it's nice to hear those things, because then we're like more interested in your solution, because we know that you have felt the same way that we have.
Okay, I need to weave that into my family
And I
network.
would,
Is what?
and you need to also make sure that you make sure they know that no matter what age their child is, no matter where they are in the developmental progression, it's not too late to make things better.
Right, right.
Sometimes, even if they're out of the house and maybe they're in a group home or maybe they're on their own, you can still make things better. You might not be able to have as much influence as you would when they're 2, 3, and through their teenage years, but you can still make things better.
Okay. So tell the story about my son smacking me so hard my ear was bleeding. Is that
That's a good one.
yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah,
Also,
I've
the
read a lot of stories.
What's that?
I've read a lot of your stories, and I mean, for me, I know what you've been through, but looking at you from someone else's perspective and seeing, well, he might say that he's had a struggle, but has he really? Because he seems fine. So,
I like the stories, especially the way you write them. Everything from was it a diaper that came down the slide at McDonald's, or was it
Yeah. It was
underpants?
underpants. Yeah.
Underpants, yeah.
So
And then like rubbing the dot off of the Indian kid in the pool.
yeah, that
Oh,
was
I
yeah
just love
in
those stories.
Chick-fil-A. Yeah, he licked his thumb and rubbed the dot off a kid's head. The
Yep,
religious dot.
at
Yeah.
Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, and those yeah, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. Yeah, because I guess it's hard to. So what I need to do is I need to probably here's what I'm thinking, and tell me if I'm way off here. I need to prep myself and show the emotion of that pain. Yeah, because
Yeah.
I can tell those stories now and laugh, but it wasn't funny when my son caught me square in the ear and my ear started bleeding. It wasn't funny when he spit on the picture of Shelly. Those stories, when it's interesting how you tell stories later and you can smile, but in those moments, there's no smiling.
Yeah.
There's
Right.
no smiling going on. There's rage and fury.
Well, and even what you just expressed is perfect.
Okay. Well, maybe.
You know, you can smile after, you can laugh after,
Yeah.
but in the moment, you're furious and you're embarrassed and you're all the things.
Yeah.
But
That's one of our
And
lessons.
you know what? Maybe the style in which you do it. So here's the risk: if you come at it and you re-feel the emotion, that's going to turn people off because they have enough of that emotion in their life, and if they're empathetic, they're going to feel it and they're not going to want to continue on. So you might just identify, very similar how you did it here, and just say, hey, look, I'm going to be smiling about these stories, but inside I was hurting. Inside I was raging. Inside I was this way. But now I can tell it without displaying that. Just know that that's how it was, so that you don't have to, because if you introduce the emotion in the presentation, people like myself, and I recognize I'm unique, but maybe I'm a small sample size of a larger group, but it I avoid getting back into the muck and the mire, and when someone else is going through it, I have to be in the right spot to be okay with that. But if someone's just like, oh, this is the way it was, I'm like, oh, he knows. And if he doesn't introduce the emotion with it but states the emotion, then I can go, oh, yeah, I know what that's like.
Okay. I appreciate that from you, Cameron.
I
So
agree with
You agree
that.
with that? Okay. So you don't.
I do.
If I tell a story and my eyes well up, I'm not suggesting you see tears, but I may dab them or something. Would that create a connection with you so you feel that pain? And I'm not going to manufacture it. I'm going to do what I do because I'm not going to manufacture anything. But sometimes when I tell stories, Cameron, you've seen it. There,
mm-hmm.
and if I relive it, would
Yeah.
it create connection with you? If I'm telling you the story and you see it in me, even if I don't. Um, I guess my question is: do I need to tell the story and let people connect with the story on a deeper level than just giving them the flyover and smiling? Would it be more
if
impactful
you
and more
if you do
connected?
it too soon, it's got to be when you tell it. And you're in the first session, so I would just, hey, I might tear up. Don't worry, I'm not going to go into the depths, right?
Yeah.
That might be the way to do it. It's just so that people can go, I can get through this. He's lived it. Oh, I've lived it. I'm reminded of my nephew. I'm reminded of my daughter. I'm reminded of my son. It's okay though, because he's not going to wallow in it. And I think that might be the more important principle here, is that I don't need more emotion in my life per se when I'm trying to deal with my kids. I have plenty of my own emotions.
Right.
So
Okay. And I'm wondering if that little bit of connection would like you said, it's kind of hard to listen to somebody give you steps or advice to run down a path if they don't feel. Cameron and I will say they don't think. Maybe you might say, uh, Sarah, you don't feel like I know. There's a difference, right? Thinking and feeling is different. And so I'm curious if the connection would be made more strongly if I tell the story and don't try to, and because a lot of times I'll smile as I tell stories so that I don't well up with tears,
Yeah.
right? So I'm curious if the connection that might come if I just tell the story and let my emotions flow, would that connection be more powerful and motivate you more to follow through with the rest of the program? I'm just curious.
I think just knowing that whatever you're saying is real and not trying to hide your
Okay.
emotions, like not trying to, but also not trying to make it more
Okay.
emotional. I think just being real,
Yeah.
just keeping it 100% real, and when you laugh and you smile about, okay, it's funny now, but back then, and then you're not laughing and smiling, it was not funny. It was not, there was no joy. I was upset, and being real, you don't have to get teary-eyed in order for me to feel a connection, but just being real about it. And like, I did feel this way, and I did have these emotions that sometimes I acted on,
Sure.
and just be honest.
Okay. Perfect. I love it.
And not that you wouldn't be
Right.
honest. I mean, I'm not saying that you wouldn't be, but you present things in the very best possible way most of the time, which is great, but it sometimes feels like, but that's Kyle and I'm not Kyle. I can't do what Kyle does because he doesn't know how hard it is for me.
Gotcha. Okay. That's a good distinction. I appreciate that, guys. Perfect. All right. The next video, um, int- we talked about not one size fits all. Okay. The next video is internalizing and not looking too far ahead. And I'm going to talk about, I'm stealing something from you in this video, Sarah, straight up theft from you. Uh, because Cameron came to me one day and said, you do things the way you want to for quite a while, and then you slip and you feel so right. You're running a path and you're following the principles you want to follow, and you're just doing it perfectly, and then you slip, and it feels so horrible, and it beats you up, right? And you
Yeah.
think, am I ever going to get this? Right? And that's what this one is going to be about, where I talk about kind of learning to internalize it, but also realizing that we're all human and we're going to make mistakes, and we're never going to do everything perfectly right every time. And while we have to be 100% accountable to ourselves, but we also have to give ourselves a whole lot of grace, right? Knowing that we can do something 10 times in a row perfectly, and the 11th time we can fail miserably, right? And we have to really realize that going in, and realize that is the moment where I need to apply all the love and kindness to myself, because I'm giving my full effort, and I'm right. So I'm going to talk a lot about that in that video, because I think that's after hearing Cameron share that with me about your situation, I realized I've done that a million times, but I don't really share that with people, right? I don't share my failures when Eric does something, which I had one last night. Amazing. Surprising? No, it shouldn't be, right? He wore me down last night. Just wore me down to
Mhm.
bone last night. And I slipped, right? And shortly after, I caught myself in kind of misery. And I want to make sure people know that that's really part of it. There's no perfect parent. There never will be, right? But there's the work we can do consistently, and we've got to forgive ourselves really quickly in those cases, right? So I'm going to talk a lot about that. What do you guys think about that approach to that video?
No, I think that's good. I learned something recently that was shocking to me, um, and that is that people respond better to consistent mistreatment than they do to back and forth. And I thought that was really interesting because I was like, so it's better to treat your children bad all the time than it is to treat them bad sometimes and to treat them good sometimes, because the inconsistency of treatment is worse than being mistreated. And I don't know if that's true, but it helped me um, stand firmer in my in my decision to treat my kids well, regardless of how I feel. And if that means I need to step away, then I step away. It doesn't mean that I'm perfect or that I do it all right, but it does mean that I choose the path of least resistance, which is okay. You know what? And if that comes with some sort of canned response, like I love canned responses because sometimes I just don't know what to say. And so I can say, nevertheless, I'm going to go in my room right now and take a break because I can't continue this conversation right now. We're going to have to take a break. And that means that, yeah, I wasn't perfect, but I also didn't explode, which is a win,
I love
right?
that. I can see a couple things in what you just said. One, I think the reason they may think that consistency is vital is because our kids are learning how the world works. And a lot of that happens in our homes. And if the world works very inconsistently in our homes, then they're not learning a lot, right? They're thinking the world is inconsistent and
Yeah.
there's no consistency in the world. If there's no consistency in their home, how can they imagine there's any consistency anywhere? And that is chaos. And chaos is just really hard to understand and work with. So I understand the principle. Maybe I understand the principle behind why somebody would say it's better to be consistent, one way or the other. Um,
Mhm.
but I also appreciate, so I can get the principle behind that statement more than I can the direct statement. But also
Right.
I love your idea of canned responses, right? And you've discovered when you get to a certain point, nothing good is going to happen, right? And
Mhm.
Yep.
you have created a pattern for yourself and a plan to say, I'm at that point. I'm recognizing that I'm at that point, and it's time for me to. And what that does for your kids is say, that's consistency, right? That's not at this point. I'm not getting anywhere. Mom's not getting anywhere. She's leaving because she's going to go think through this, right? And maybe I should do the same. Or maybe that's a good model for your kids when they're in a situation where nothing good is coming of it, for them to say, mom stepped away. And when she got in this situation, what a
Yeah.
great model, what a great example for them. And that's teaching them that sometimes in this world, when things are starting to get to a point where it's right, nothing good is coming from this, it is okay for me to step away, take some time, right, and do what I need to do. So I love that in both areas, right? I appreciate that, and I'm going to make sure I weave that in as well. And that's really part of, is the video too, which is having a plan, right? Things
Mhm.
really, these challenges, once they happen once, we should take the time to step back and say, okay, it's probably not the last time that's going to happen. Why don't I make a plan of attack, or maybe attack's not the right word, but a plan of things I'm going to do consistently the next time this challenge comes, and that'll give my kids consistency, and it'll give me a plan instead of being swept into the emotion. I can follow those steps and do it right cognitively.
An action plan.
Yeah, right. An action plan. I love that. Okay, perfect. Anything else about internalizing or not looking too far ahead and not beating yourself up too bad?
Um, One thing that would have been helpful for me is to know that there is absolutely no way on earth that I will have all the answers ever. And knowing that um like having the outlook of it being a discovery instead of a I need to figure out the answer to this problem, instead of having that focus, having it be a focus of discovery where I am on a journey of discovery, and I am going to have this be my action plan, and I'm going to discover what works and what doesn't, and then change my action plan based on that discovery. Because I felt like early on, I felt like there has to be an answer for this, and somebody has to know it. And so I just need to find out the answer. And it was frustrating because nobody had the answer.
I love that.
So that part of it I did beat myself up about quite a bit, because I was like, we just don't have the answers, and so we can't do it right. Instead of, I want to know what I can do better tomorrow, and so I'll discover that today.
Fantastic. I love that. And you've just described to me what I used to be, which is I bought every book. I read every book looking for the answer, right? When the
Mhm.
answer wasn't really the answer, it was, and all of our kids are different, right? They're very unique. They're going to respond different ways, and we're different as parents too, right? So there isn't one canned answer. You reminded me, and I'll share this
Yeah.
real quickly with you. After my wife passed away, uh, shortly after, I was reading some Napoleon Hill. He's a self help guy, and there was this quote that upset me real bad, and it said, "For every challenge or trial or discouragement we face in this life comes the seed of equivalent or greater value." And it upset me. And I had believed it before, but I thought there's no way I'm ever going to I'm ever going to find equivalent or greater value, because that is too tragic. It's too painful. That's not true anymore for me,
Yeah.
right? And it upset me really bad. And I remember not being happy with that. And for over a year, I would it would just upset me to think about that, because there's no stinking way, right? But then I found that quote again.
Yeah.
I found that quote again, after I want to say maybe even a couple of years. I don't know exactly when, but I read the quote again, but I read it differently this time. And it said, "For every challenge or trial or difficulty we face in this life comes the seed of equivalent or greater value." And I noticed that word seed. And it made me think a seed is not a full grown bloom, and it's not right? A seed isn't a tree, it's not a flower. It's a seed that needs to be nurtured, right? And it goes back to what you're saying, which is it's discovery. The answer isn't out there. The seed of discovery is really where we should be focusing, because we can focus on nurturing that seed, right? And nurture the discovery of of searching for those things one day at a time. So I really appreciate. I needed to share that story in that moment, because it was a powerful story for me, and it's really and it made me happier, right? Because instead of thinking somehow I've got to figure out a way to achieve this glory in this life that matches that, there's no way. But what I can do is nurture that
Right.
seed. And there's a lot of ways I can do that today, and do that happily and lovingly. And so it was really a powerful lesson for me. So I appreciate you sharing that, because that is really I think the answer to a lot of what we're doing is we're not going to find the answers in a book. We're going to have to discover those things, right? There may be the framework of an answer, and we may be able to apply those things, but we're always going to have to be adjusting and learning and growing. Even as we even as we parent our adult kids that are married, you're they're going to bring us challenges, and you guys are on your way there pretty soon, I think, aren't you? It's going to be exciting to see,
We are.
because now they're adding someone else in who hasn't grown up in our world, right? And they bring in a different dynamic, and it's
Yeah.
fascinating. I say fascinating instead of frustrating, right? Obviously, it's fascinating because they come from different worlds. So perfect. Okay, let's talk about the next video, which is don't freak out. When everything goes horribly sideways, when the world is ending, we can't allow our emotions. When our kids are at their most challenged, when they're struggling the most, is really when they need us. Is when they need us at our best. but it's obviously the hardest time. So this is where I share the weight framework. You guys know what this is, and how to really snap yourself into a state of
Mm-hmm.
productivity and do things in a state of love, even when it gets super duper super hard. Right. So that's the video where I cover that weight formula. Any ideas about that, or any thoughts on that?
Mm. Um, I think for me, this is where the grace has to come in because I don't always feel capable myself of being my best self. And that's really hard to overcome because, I have health issues that sometimes puts me down. Um, but I will say that I kind of have a mantra that I just have go through my head. Um, I like the weight, you know, the what it stands for. Um, but I also think that you have to have a mantra of some type going on in your head as far as it is going to be okay, and this is hard right now, but it's hard right now and it's going to get better. And whether that's having on speed dial a best friend that will tell you that whenever you need to hear it, or having some sort of support system, because it's really hard to do it alone all the time. And figuring out what that support looks like for you in those times where you can't be your best self, and it's just you just have to do something to get back to homeostasis of being able to respond well. Because I have a really hard time controlling my emotions when my children are emotional. It is so difficult for me to not get caught up. Um, and so sometimes I just have to call a friend and say, "Listen, this is what's going on, and I just need to talk because I'm not handling it well, and I need to tell somebody about it." So that, and whether that's writing it down on a piece of paper and then burning it, I don't know what methods there are out there, but I know what I do that works for me. And it seems like there has to be something, because having the expectation of somebody being their best self when your kid is not in a good state can be overwhelming.
I like that. That's interesting.
And you need support. You need support,
Because
outside support.
because even no matter if you're married, happily married, you still feel alone in that moment.
Hmm.
And it's almost hard to imagine anybody can understand in that moment, right? It doesn't it I
Yeah.
felt that too. I felt situations where this is so unique and so different. Nobody understands, nobody can connect with me. I'm alone on this one, right? And that's paralyzing sometimes.
Yes.
Okay, I like that. I understand that. Obviously, I understand that because I just. What do you think, Cameron? Cameron's kind of got pushed out of this whole conversation, hasn't he, Cameron? If you don't have anything to say, you don't have to say anything. But I'd like to
This
hear
is
what.
the best ever. I'm enjoying listening, and so what am I thinking? It applies to being when you're a parent, and it applies to when you're an employee. It applies to when you're a boss. It applies to when you're sitting in church. It applies all the time. And so for me, I would probably talk about, hey, this you use this everywhere. Get into the habit of using this everywhere, because then when it's interesting to me that we as parents will treat those we care about the most in horrible ways that we wouldn't do to a perfect stranger on the street. And yet the perfect stranger on the street. And I think actually for me, the reason for myself, I think it's because I can justify that I can make it up to them later. I have time. But the stranger on the street, I only have the one shot. So what am I thinking? I need to apply it every time to my kids. And like Sarah was saying earlier, just be consistent because you might not get another shot. And we had some friends whose 14-year-old shot himself a couple weeks ago. They don't have another opportunity. So it's important to practice it everywhere, especially with your own kids.
It's interesting you say that. Last night I had a conversation with my 16-year-old twins, one boy, one girl, and they were in the kitchen bickering over absolutely nothing, like kids do, right? That's what they do.
Mm-hmm.
It's just what they do. And I was in the living room, I could hear it. And I stopped him and I said, "You know what? If you said what you just said to your brother or your sister to a friend, they wouldn't be your friend anymore." And they both stopped and I said, "I'd really like you guys to talk to each other like you would your friends. If that's what you need to do to talk to each other kindly and treat each other kindly, because I got a feeling she's not going to be your friend anymore if you talk to some other girl like that or you talk to some other guy like that, they're not going to like you at all." And I don't think that's really what you're after with your own brother
Yeah.
or sister, you know? And they said, "Well," and then Jack said, "Well, do you talk to us like you would talk to your friends?" And I sure do try. Hopefully you get that from me, right? And by the way I just approached this with you,
Yeah.
the way I just approached this, I could have easily said, "Hey, you two, don't be jerks in there. Treat each other kindly, you stupid idiots." Right? Aren't you 16? Haven't you learned that by now? But guess what? I wouldn't say that to a friend. What I would probably say to a friend is, "Hey, listen," which is what I hope I said to you just now. And hopefully that's the way it came across. Right. And it's interesting. It never ends, does it? It's just part of, it's, it's part of that process. But again, when they've been bickering and and you said to them multiple times, "Hey guys, cut it off. Come on, stop, 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 stop."
Yep.
Right. You guys know where I'm going with this. Right. But and that's the natural thing. Right. And I think that's kind of the biggest challenge, to go back to what you said, Sarah. Our natural initial responses are not, are just our natural initial responses. They're not who we are. Okay. There's patterns we get into and we've got to catch ourselves. Right. But knowing that, I think the reason we fall back is we feel so alone in it. We feel nobody can understand, but having somebody you can call and talk to, or just somebody to empathize with you, or just to talk it through, and them to say, "It's happened to me too. It's okay." Right. And I like what you said. It's okay. So I'll consider
Yeah.
weaving in that people need to come up with their own support system, right? In their own, and that could be a lot of different ways. I know different people have different support systems. I have one for myself that I use, that I know is there, so I can push off those challenging things, and like Cameron says, put them in a box and put them over here away from me and function okay.
Yep.
And then I can pull it down and talk to my support system, right? Or whoever I need to do. So I'll make sure I cover that. So you know what? I'm not going to go into your plan moving forward. That's the last video because I don't want to make this video too long. But I think you, thank you so much, Sarah, for, you've helped me clarify some of the ideas that I had and made me realize that there's some wording that's going to be much more powerful. And some areas I need to build out and some areas I need to squeeze down. So I really appreciate you doing that for me. Um, we could cover the free. Give me a general flyover of the worksheet, Sarah, that I sent to you guys, the freebie.
I love it. I think it's very well done, and it is exactly what I want to avoid and what I want to do. As far as parent does not take charge, parent does take charge. Um, Having the belief that with the right tools, I can become, well, I guess as I read through it, and people that are listening don't know what I'm reading, but as I read through it, there were a lot of things that I agreed with. There were some
Okay.
questions. The clear rules and consequences are established. That one's really tricky for me,
Okay.
because you can't have clear rules as a family when you have all these unique people,
Okay.
and you can't have clear consequences either. So,
When and can you explain that a little bit more? Because I think people who are listening would go, "Oh yeah, you can." You but you can't have
so
consistent.
So, to give you an example, our 18-year-old son has been drinking caffeine for the last 2 years on a regular basis, and we don't let our kids drink caffeine as a rule. He drinks caffeine medicinally. So, he breaks that rule, but it's because he's on a lot of medications and fatigue him really bad. And his psychiatrist said, drink caffeine. Instead of taking a stimulant, he drinks caffeine. And that's one of those tough rules for me because my other kids are seeing it, and yet I don't let them drink caffeine.
Yeah.
So that's an example.
I think I'm going to go back to what you said early on, which is clear expectations might be a better term there. And I
Yeah.
don't know that consequences is the right
Well,
word.
and also
What's that?
communication with your other children too, and explaining to them, not just having them be like, well, why can Hyatt drink caffeine and I can't? Being able to say, well, actually, Hyatt's doctor recommended this for him. And if your doctor recommended it for you, we would let you drink it,
That's a great point.
or let you take the test.
I work with a family right now who's struggling with their the parents are treating the kids differently because the kids require different treatment. And their question to me was, how do I explain not fair? Right? Because they're coming to me with
Huh.
it's not fair, it's not fair, it's
Yeah.
not fair. And we talked about using the framework that we talk about for challenges, right, with their kids who are capable of sitting down and saying, "Here's the challenge I'm facing. I don't think it's fair." And their parents sat down with them and walked through it. And obviously, our kids don't like that they require. I had one son that was defiant, overly defiant, and he could not do. He had less freedom than his brother. He fussed at me like you wouldn't believe, right? But it all boiled down to I trusted his brother. I don't trust you. When I don't trust you, here's how you get trust. You want trust?
Right.
Here's how you get trust. And we wrote it out and we talked through it. And I said, I want you to have as much fun as possible. I promote it. Like if it's legal, moral, ethical, and nobody gets hurt too bad, I'm sending you to do it. But you have broken the trust on multiple occasions. So there are things that we've had to put in place. Now, can you regain that trust? Let's work on that. And it worked. He was able to work through that, right? But you're right. You almost have to sit down with your kids and say, your challenge is that you're jealous. You want to drink Dr. Pepper or Coke or whatever it is. And I get it. Here's why this is the situation. Why is that a challenge for you? Are you exhausted? Are you right? There's a lot of ways to handle it, right? But they shouldn't expect to be,
Yeah.
the world doesn't treat everybody the same, and they shouldn't expect it in our homes. Why are they expecting it in our homes? Because is that what we're teaching them? Who knows, right? I'm not teaching my kids they're all treated the same. They're not. I promise you, they're not.
Well,
And
in the world, they're learning it. Not necessarily in families, but in the world, they're learning
guess
it
what? That's going to
because
harm
of
them. That's
the
going to harm them out of it.
exaggeration of being treated hopefully.
Yeah, well, guess what? That's going to be a problem out in the world if they expect to get treated the same as somebody. If somebody goes to college for 8 years and gets a doctor's degree, and you expect to get treated the same as them, it's not going to happen. Nobody's the same. Okay, the world isn't fair. I mean, they can claim it is, but the world isn't fair. So I can see a crinkle. What are you thinking, Sarah?
Well, the other thing that I'm really struggling with is consequences.
Yeah, I put a star next to that.
I don't know how to come up with consequences that work for one of my children because I can't take things away because they don't want to do stuff. So with some of my kids, I can say, "Hey, you can't take the car unless your chores are done. So once your chores are done, you can take the car." But then you have a child who has no desire to get off the couch or do anything. What are the consequences? You have to go outside for an hour and play? I mean, I don't know how to come up with real consequences. And that is a huge struggle for me because the consequences that I can come up with just create more work for me and more discord with the child.
Okay,
So that one's
that's the
hard.
discovery, right? That's the discovery you're talking about. That, yeah,
Yeah.
it's going to be hard either way, right? But now I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. You should take my course once.
But I love ideas. Yeah.
Again,
Like
we,
we need like a group of people.
here's the interesting thing, and you'll probably agree with me on this, Sarah. Somebody may come and I'm sure people have said, try this, try this, try this, and you've tried it, and then you've kind of said that didn't work, that didn't work, that didn't work. I'm alone. Nobody else has this issue, right? You go back to that same spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll share with you. You may have heard this, but my dad was a get rich quick guy that never got rich, and
Mhm.
he called me after I was a grown adult, and he said, "Hey, I got this idea." And I said, "Dad, after years and years of watching him go through hundreds of get rich quick schemes and never getting rich, I said, Dad, don't you ever get tired of these get rich quick schemes? They just don't work." And he kind of got quiet for a few minutes, and he said, "What's the worst thing that can happen? I can die trying." And I could see the smile on his face almost through the phone when he said it. And it really upset me because it was stupid to me. It just seemed stupid. What? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, until I sat back and thought about it enough, and I realized his joy wasn't in achieving the goal. It was in pursuing the goal, right? And he made the joy in looking for it, and it kept him buoyant. It kept him happy. And guess what? He died trying. He never quit, and he left a wake of happiness everywhere he went. And that seems to me like a really good thing, right? And so I think if we can view these things, these challenges that seem unending, as, how do I do this in a spirit of love consistently and just stay with it? And guess what? If I die trying, that seems valiant, and I can be happy if I try to approach it in the right way. Or maybe that's my challenge. How do I do this in a way that makes me happy? Right? That's a me thing. How do I serve this child who just doesn't seem to get it? And I've got one. I've got one that just does not like me ever, and is very positively evident in the way he treats me. And it's, how do I do this in a way that keeps me happy, and I'm going to die trying, and I'm going to leave awake, right? And that seems valiant to me. That seems like that's okay. If I never figure it out, if he never figures it out, that's okay, right? Because I die trying, and there's valiant. It seems like the right thing to do for him, and I know it's the right thing to do for me, because I can stay happy. I can stay motivated and kind and loving, even though that sucker ain't getting it. He will net, right? You saw a little bit of pinch of my frustration in there, didn't you? Just now, when I called him a sucker. Yeah. So it's in there. It's in there, right? But I'm so determined and I've written it out, how I want to feel through this process. That's my long-term objective. I need to feel this way through this process. The outcome isn't as important as my effort and how I want to feel, and that I'm trying to do the right things consistently and adjusting as I go. That's got to be the way I approach it, right? And I've got to feel good about that.
Love,
Yeah.
I love
I don't
that.
like consequences either, and
I mean,
I actually wrote a line through it. So I'm going to come up with it. Maybe it's expectations are set and outcomes are expected or something, right? I mean, I need to come up with a new way to say that, but I completely agree with you. I love where you're going with that because you're right. Sometimes consequences, and I don't really like to apply false consequences to kids. I want the world to be the teacher. I don't really want it to be me so much. I mean, I have to help them discipline themselves because they need that guide. But I really want the world and to be their teacher if it can, and me just be a guide for it, right? Because I don't like applying consequences. I'd much rather just grace my way through the whole world because I feel like if I do that, then that's what I get. If I just throw grace at everybody, maybe I'll get the grace at the end. That's what I'm after, right? Because I need it. I need as much grace as I can get. So
that's awesome.
there's a lesson right there. Whoever's
I
watching,
think that's a great place to. Oh, I was just going to wrap it up because I thought that was a great place to leave off.
thank you so much, guys.